All right, let's get started. So yeah, like I said, we're gonna be focusing on user experience design course over the next 5 weeks. We have quite a few things planned, and happy to be pretty flexible. So happy for you to say, this thing is really working for me, or this thing is not working so well. I'm happy to change things up. So the learning objectives for today, and we'll try to finish in about 45 minutes. So the first one is to be able to define the main differences between UX and the different fields around it. So things like UI, things like product design, and similar types of field that often people confuse, but are actually fairly distinct. We will talk about what you hope to learn from this course, and we'll do some activities, and then we will talk about some helpful mindsets. So mindsets of optimism, curiosity, and humility. Cool. So our focus today is we'll be doing a quick introduction, defining UX. Like I said, we'll talk about those helpful mindsets. We'll get an introduction to three frameworks that help us when we're thinking about design, and then we'll talk about what are the projects that we're keen on pursuing during these 5 weeks, and then we'll form teams around that. So why are we here? So like I said, I'm Abram. I consider myself a few different roles. I think of myself as a designer, researcher, and facilitator. And that's mainly because I don't see design as a field that you get in and you stop learning. You kind of play different roles depending on the project. So depending on your team members and what skill set is needed, you can play different roles. And the one thing that I'm really focused on is positive, lasting change. So I'm lucky enough to have a job that's for impact and purpose driven. And I really enjoy that because it means I can have a positive impact on the world. So a bit about me, 5 years experience in design. I managed somehow to work around the world on complex problems. So you can see some photos there on the right of Africa and Bhutan and Marshall Islands. I coach teams in a fair few countries as well to create human-centered design solutions. But having said that, I have a software engineering background, so I only came to design after all my studies, and it's been a wild ride, I would say. So our approach to the course will be project-based learning, where we choose a problem we're passionate about, and that's why we'll get you each to identify a problem that you're passionate about, and then form groups around that. And apply what we learn. And what a big reason of these 1 hour sessions is they're not designed to kind of teach you everything. They're designed to teach you some things, but then through your team projects, you can learn a lot more. And why I designed the course that way is because user experience design is a team sport. It's very rare that you see a brilliant designer. It's much more common to see a brilliant design team. And that's because, like I said before, there's so many different roles and responsibilities in design that it really needs a team to be able to create a human-centered solution. So on a weekly basis, what we'll have is learning sessions, same time as now. We'll have teamwork, and that will be up to you and your team to schedule around your availabilities and time zones. And then we'll also have check-ins with me. So each team can have 1 or 2 or 3 check-ins depending on their progress and what they need help with. They can just reach out and schedule some time to talk about their progress and what they want to achieve. Does that make sense so far? Any questions?
Makes sense.
Cool, awesome. Has anyone seen this quote before? So it's Albert Einstein, and he said, "We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them."
Yeah.
Cool. A lot of people use this quote to talk about design thinking as a new way of approaching problems that have existed for a long time, especially complex problems, and we can talk a bit more about that. But yeah, so design, how I see design is that it's not just useful for UX and UI, but it's just useful for all sorts of problems, especially some of the most complex problems that we face as a society. The timely one is is systemic racism. But yeah, all sorts of problems you can apply what we will learn during this 5 weeks to. Okay, defining UX. So yeah, I think you picked up UX and UI are often kind of brought together. When you look at literature, it's actually quite separate. So when you're thinking about design, there's a few different fields. So the first one is UX design. That's what we're going to be focused on. It's basically designing an end-to-end experience, right, and putting in place the components that define that experience. There's UX research where you're trying to understand people's experiences about like a current experiences about with a service or a product. There's product design, and product design is again a bit different. It's less about the experience and more about the product, whether that's a physical product or whether that's a software product. There's visual design, which is like a poster or a brochure or something. There's UI, so user interface design, and that's around where does the button go, what happens when you press the button, what happens if the button is disabled, things like that. And then the final one is motion design, and that's where you see characters jumping around the screen or the loading bar looking funky. Does that make sense for people in terms of the different design fields?
Yes, it does.
So like UX design is more on the entirety of it, while UI is more into the details or something.
Yeah. I think that's
okay.
I think that's a good way. Like if we think about an app, right? When we're designing an app, we're thinking about, so when we're doing UX design, we're thinking about, okay, what does onboarding look like? What does it look like when people sign up? Do they need to sign up, for example, before they use the service, or can they just use the service without signing up? Whereas UI is talking about, okay, in the sign up screen, what does that screen look like? Do we have, where do we put the two fields and the logo and the button to sign up and log in? Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you.
Cool. No worries. No, thanks for asking. Okay. So, oh yeah.
If UX is all about website and apps, or is it? It can be of anything.
Is UX about websites and apps, or it can be anything?
Yeah, like experience can be like any restaurant or any space or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. UX design is not just software. It's, for example, like what's the experience of opening your iPhone for the first time, or what's the experience of going to McDonald's? That's an experience that's designed as well. So yeah, it's definitely not just software or hardware. It's also services that use UX design. Okay, so Steve Jobs talks about this. Some people think design means how it looks, but of course, if you dig deeper, it's really how it works, and that really gets to the crux of user experience design. It's not just about what colors should we go with. It's more about what's the flow that people will go through. What does that make them feel? What experience do we want to give people while they're using the product or service? Or whatever that we're talking about. So we're going to turn to Miro. Hopefully you all have the links. Yeah, I think you're all on here. So what we want to focus on is number 1 and 2. So again, to add a post-it note, you just press the N button and just dump a post-it note somewhere. And we want to answer what would success look like at the end of the course. So if this was a really successful time together, what would that look like, and what would be different then? And then the second one is what are our guidelines for working together. And you can see that Alan, who couldn't make it with us, was very studious, and he already added his thoughts. So yeah, I'll give you a couple of minutes to add your thoughts, and then we'll talk about it. Arpit, are you good with using the mirror board?
Actually, I'm not able to access like with mobile. It's difficult.
Sorry, what was that?
With mobile, it's difficult to operate actually.
Okay, if you want, you can message on Zoom chat and add your thoughts there, and I can paste them into the mirror board.
Sure.
So once you finish the first question, go to the second question, which is what are our guidelines for working together? Awesome. Is everyone done or close to?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Cool. Awesome. We'll go back in. So what do we have? We have success would look like a newfound understanding of tools and knowledge that are at my disposal for the pursuit in a career and user experience. Understand in-depth design process and steps and how different teams interact with each other when it comes to building the product. Getting a better understanding of UX, and we'll get an opportunity to make things more usable and better for the users. Have a better understanding on how design works and to be able to apply it in future projects, and coming away with a groundwork of UX processes and principles and having a better ability to communicate and design within a team. Awesome. We will hopefully achieve all of that. What are our guidelines for working together? So working and solving problems together, being respectful and listening to each other, and leaving our ego behind and letting data lead decisions and speak for itself. Communicating with respect, giving each other the space for ideas and inputs, and being able to give and receive honest feedback and to help push each other forward. and collaborative effort leads to better UX results. UX is all about improving continuously. The more we collaborate, the better the results will come out. Awesome. And Chris Steele, communicating opinions, constructive criticism, and something else. Awesome. I think you sound like natural born designers. Yeah. So design, a big part of design is less about the tools, and definitely more about the approach that you take to your life, but to working with other people. And yeah, I would say, solving problems together, communicating, being respectful. I think that they are must-haves for designers. Cool. Chris Steele added helping each other out. Awesome. How does that sound? Is everyone good with the guidelines for working together?
Yeah, I like.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the next thing. Wait a second. I just realized you don't have my my screen. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes.
I was going through a presentation this whole time. All right, reminder to myself to actually share my screen. Okay, so these are 4 helpful mindsets. So the first one is empathy, the second one is hope, the third one is curiosity, and the fourth one is humility. Whenever you look at mindsets for design, it's always framed a little bit differently depending on the context. But I wanted to ask you, what do you think empathy, hope, curiosity, and humility, what do you think they sound like? Like when someone is talking, what would empathy, hope, curiosity, humility, what would that sound like?
Like one should be empathetic to identify the problems. Otherwise, if we aren't empathetic, we won't be able to feel the problems of the customers, the clients, the people. So that's quite important.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Someone else. So what I'm looking for is answers like curiosity sounds like I don't really understand that problem, but I need to know more. Does that make sense? So like if 2 people are talking, what would curiosity sound like?
I think empathy sounds like asking what hindrances the user is facing and how we can alleviate them.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Empathy is also on trying to put yourself in the shoes of others,
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Perfect. What about hope? What does anyone think about hope? What does that sound like?
Hope. The opposite of despair.
Excellent. Yep. So it's about not giving up.
Yeah, having a positive outlook on what's wrong with the current situation or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. All right. What about curiosity and humility? Does anyone want to share?
I think humility can be willing to listen and let go of personal attachments or stubbornness and let yourself be open to change and improve.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really impressed. Okay, so empathy. You're absolutely right. So empathy helps designers especially set aside their own assumptions about the world. And because we can do that. I mean, it is difficult, but because we can do that, it helps us step into the shoes of people and what their needs are, and that's irrespective of whether you're designing a product or service or whatever it is. You have the empathy. You need to have the empathy to be able to say, I'm not coming with my thoughts. I want to understand what your life is like. The second one is hope. And the difference between hope and optimism, I actually initially framed this as optimism, but I decided last minute to change it to hope. And it was because I listened to a talk recently talking about how hope is like having an idea that things will be better, but having a way to get there. Whereas optimism is just about, you have confidence that something will work out, but you're not sure how it will work out. Does that make sense? And I think as designers, it's in our hands to be able to say, we don't know exactly how a product or service will look better, but we know we have the tools to make it better. And then curiosity, so that's a strong desire to know or learn something, and this helps us understand the problem space deeply. So often when you're designing, especially in a new service or a new product, you don't really understand what you're doing, but because you're curious, you're trying to learn as much as possible while you're kind of getting your feet in the ground. And then the last one is humility. And that's super important because as designers, for us, it's not about having the answers. Usually, actually, people's experience have the answers. But for us, it's about being humble enough to understand that we don't always know everything and there's always more to learn. Cool. Okay, so I'm gonna introduce you to 3 frameworks. And frameworks is basically a basic structure underlying a system, concept, or solution. And I'll give you some examples. But why frameworks are important is they help us create a mental model or a map of the problem or solution or concept. And then that way we can kind of be able, if someone says something, we can fit what they say into that mental model. So let's see. Has anyone ever seen this this framework or this model?
No, not before.
I haven't. This is my first time seeing this.
Cool, awesome. We have at work we have this in big, like near where the kitchen is, and it's called the Design Squiggle by someone called Daniel Newman. You can look him up afterwards. And basically, he talks about this as the design process. Initially, when you're doing research, it's really fuzzy. You're hearing things from people, and it sounds almost contradictory. Sometimes it does sound contradictory, and you're still kind of trying to create a visual kind of mental model of the system in your head. Okay, and you're going back and forth. It's not at all a linear process. Sometimes you'll have a conversation with someone, you'll do a bit of research and it'll raise more questions than answers, and you'll go back and talk to someone or do a bit of desktop research, and so on and so forth. Eventually though, you start to come up with ideas about first you understand the problem and define it well, and then based on that you create concepts, and once you've kind of identified a concept that is promising, then you start doing design work. Does that make sense? Cool. And why I share this is because the first couple of weeks of this course, it's gonna feel a bit messy, especially when you're working in your teams. You're gonna be struggling to understand the problem and potential ideas to solve it, and that's okay. That's how it's supposed to feel. It took me a couple of years to get used to that feeling. But because we're working with design and still trying to understand what a problem looks like and the root causes, it's going to be messy. So the second framework I want to share with you is the six levels of user experience, and this is inspired by Jesse James Garrett. You can check his framework there in the link. But basically, it talks about before you start. So when we talk about design or a new product or service, there's multiple layers to that. So if we're talking about a product, say it's Twitter, right, or Reddit. The first question we need to ask is once we figured out the problem and come up with a solution is what value does this thing create for the user? Yeah. So for example, for Reddit, it might be anonymously connecting with people about shared topics of interest. And then you sort of start to go down into the use case, user journey, information architecture, visual, and why it's stepped is based on the proposition. You'll figure out a use case. Based on the use case, you'll design a user journey. Based on the user journey, you'll say this is the information and actions that are required, and so on and so forth. And it becomes kind of more concrete as you go down those 6 levels. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So when we're coming up with a solution, we use this framework, for example, to say, okay, what's the value proposition of this new solution that you're coming up with, and yeah, we'll go down those layers. So don't worry if you don't understand it too much. It's okay, because you will experience it. I think it's the last one I want to share with you is. It's actually a framework that my company came up with, and it's called 4 Voices of Design. And basically, when we're talking about design, we consider 4 voices. Okay, so the first one is design, which is basically us, right? The people that are kind of facilitating different voices, that are doing experience, that are designing the experience. There is the intent, right? So those proposing the change. So it might be your client, for example, that says, we're having a product, we're having a problem with our app. Not enough people, for example, are becoming customers. Okay, so they're setting like what the problem is. There's expertise, so that might be like developers. It might be say if you're designing a new service that's around social connection, then it might be like psychologists who are experts in that project. And then there's experience. So that's typically people and users. So potential users of the service, or users that are already using the service that needs to improve. And often projects fail when you don't have one of those voices. So you're not really set on what that intent is, what your intention is, or what the outcomes you're looking for. Or you're just designing in a space, but you don't really understand the space because you haven't engaged experts. Or you're designing, but users don't like what you come up with because you haven't engaged them. You haven't kind of gotten their feedback throughout the process. Okay, so any questions so far before we go into this? Okay, take that as a no. So we want to go back to Miro, and we want to do the third yellow square, which is what is a problem you're personally passionate about. So it might be about social networks, it might be about something else. It might be about social justice. Whatever the problem is, have a think about and write as many problems as possible. Because what we'll do after the session is actually form teams around those problems. So Arpit, you can, I will post the question in the chat again, and you can tell me what the problems you're passionate about are.
It can be about anything, right?
Yeah, anything. Like, honestly, anything. Whatever it is that you're passionate about, I want to hear about that.
Okay.
Okay, just 1 more minute to think of the problems that you're passionate about that you want to focus on during these 5 weeks. I want you to get specific as well in terms of what is like what's the product or what's the service. Like that's getting to solutions, but what's the product or service trying to achieve? Does that make sense? Is it trying to connect people? Is it, yeah, what's the problem that you really want to tackle? Awesome. I like where you're heading, Chris Steele, in terms of like speaking out against injustices.
Yeah, it's kind of getting messy here in the Philippines. That's why.
No, that's good. Natalie Vardman, cool. Up it. Thanks for sending that. Natalie, do you have any specific things that you're thinking about?
No, I guess this is just something that I guess I encounter frequently. And it puts me in the headspace of user experience, but I think I'd like to think more about more specific problems that I feel strongly about.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Sounds good. And why I'm sort of pushing for, like you say, more specific problems is because once we have a problem that we think we understand, which we probably don't really understand, but we think we understand it, then we can start looking at actually doing a bit of research and talking to people who experience this problem and trying to really deeply understand the problem, so that when it comes to designing a solution, we're not designing a solution that just tries to solve the symptoms of the problem, but actually tries to solve the problem itself. Awesome. So I'll call it there. What we're going to do is this mirror board will be open for you, and I'll send the link out to a few other people that missed our chat as well. And what I'll do is once people have had a chance to kind of share what problems they're passionate about, then we'll start forming teams. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Cool, awesome. So that concludes the end of today. So I know it was pretty kind of we're still at the very surface level, but from this was just supposed to be an introduction and welcome. So I think we've hopefully achieved that. What I'm gonna do is so that last board is for any of your feedback. So feel free to talk about positives, what could be improved, what you'd like to see next time. And yeah, what I'm going to do is I'll send an email out to everyone and say, here's the Miro board. Please contribute to all the boards, especially the problems that you're passionate about. And then I think tomorrow we will start forming teams.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
For showing up. I really appreciate it.
See you next week.
Cool. See you next week. Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.